Crimson skies roiled overhead as the once vibrant cityscape crumbled into ash and ruin. Flickering shadows danced across the ground, cast by the fires engulfing the palace walls. Arlajan, the last princess of a broken dynasty, lay hidden within a collapsed chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been forgotten, abandoned in the chaos of her people's escape. The once loyal guards were gone, and those who had sworn to protect her had fled, leaving her to the mercy of the enemy. Every breath she took was shallow, tinged with the acrid scent of smoke. Her silver eyes darted to the communicator in her trembling hands, an ancient device her father had once told her could reach the farthest stars. It was her last hope, and even that felt like a desperate dream. "Someone, anyone, please!" Her voice cracked as she transmitted the message into the void. Static responded. A bead of sweat slid down her cheek, mixing with the dirt and blood smeared across her face. Outside, the heavy thud of approaching footsteps drew closer. Her people had ridden her off. The coup had shattered any hope she might have held, and the opposing factions had already claimed victory. But she wasn't going to die here, not without a fight. Miles above, on the fringes of the stratosphere, Captain Eli Parker reclined in the cockpit of his weathered starship, the Valkyrie. His eyes were shut, the dull hum of the ship's systems offering a rare moment of calm. The war-torn galaxy had left him cynical, a nomad drifting between jobs. It had been years since he'd fought for anything other than credits, and the scars of his past battles weighed heavily on his soul. Atlas, his loyal canine companion, lay curled at his feet, his black fur bristling with the faint tension that always seemed to hover in Eli's presence. The soft beep of the distress signal shattered the stillness. Eli's eyes snapped open, his hand instinctively reaching for the console. "A signal?" He frowned. Most distress beacons in this sector had long gone silent, either because no one was left to send them, or because no one cared enough to answer. The coordinates blinked on his display, showing their origin, Vorotai. Eli hesitated for a moment. This wasn't his fight. He had no ties to this dying planet, or its people. Yet something gnawed at him, a faint echo of his former self, the one who had once believed in saving lives, not just taking them. Before he could talk himself out of it, Atlas raised his head, those intelligent, knowing eyes locking onto Eli's. "Yeah, I know," Eli muttered. "I'm getting soft." With a flick of his wrist, he angled the ship toward the surface. The descent was rough. Atmospheric interference made the controls sluggish, but Eli had flown through worse. Atlas growled, low and steady, sensing the tension as they approached the signal's source. They landed in the heart of a devastated city, smoke curling into the sky like the last breaths of a dying giant. The palace lay ahead, a jagged silhouette against the burning horizon. Eli drew his blaster, scanning the ruins for movement. Atlas was already at his side, alert and ready. The communicator crackled to life again, a voice, young, scared, desperate, breaking through the static. "Please, someone!" Eli's grip tightened on his weapon as he keyed into the transmission. "I'm here. I've got your signal. Stay where you are. I'm coming." A long pause then. "I didn't think anyone would come." "Well," Eli muttered under his breath. "Neither did I." He moved swiftly through the wreckage, Atlas at his heels, the silence between explosions thick with danger. The enemy forces were near, their presence was a shadow that pressed down on everything. He could hear the distant clang of boots on metal, the rough commands barked by the soldiers hunting for their prize, the last of the royal line. Eli and Atlas reached the broken palace doors, slipping inside unnoticed. His pulse quickened as the girl's voice echoed again through his earpiece, closer now, more fragile. "They're coming for me." He turned a corner, and there she was, Princess Arlajan, small and terrified, her pale skin smeared with grime. She looked at him with wide, silver eyes, barely believing the sight in front of her. Eli knelt beside her, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to get you out of this. Can you walk?" Arla nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her. Eli hoisted her up, one arm around her as Atlas growled softly, scanning the darkened hallway. "Stay close," Eli said. "We don't have much time." And with that, they moved, the weight of the world closing in around them. The air inside the ruined palace was thick with dust and decay. Eli could hear the distant murmur of enemy voices, growing closer with each passing moment. His grip tightened on Princess Arla's arm as he led her down a narrow hallway, the weight of danger pressing down on them from all sides. "Where are we going?" Arla whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of distant fires. Her wide, silver eyes darted nervously around them, reflecting her fear. "Out of here," Eli muttered. "Fast." Atlas moved ahead, his ears pricked, scanning the path for danger. The dog's nose twitched as he detected something, an unseen presence, perhaps soldiers lurking in the shadows. Eli could feel the tension thrumming in the air, like a taut wire ready to snap. As they rounded a corner, a sudden noise stopped them in their tracks, the unmistakable clatter of armored boots on stone, too close for comfort. Eli held up a hand, signaling silence. He pressed himself against the wall, pulling Arla close to his side, his free hand hovering over the blaster holstered at his hip. Through the narrow slit of a broken window, Eli caught a glimpse of them, enemy soldiers, armored in sleek black, their helmets obscuring their faces. They moved with cold precision, scanning every inch of the palace for any signs of life. It wouldn't take long before they found the princess's hiding place. "Stay low," Eli whispered. "We need to get to the hangar bay. I have a ship waiting." Arla nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line of determination. Despite her fear, there was a growing strength in her, a spark of resilience. Eli noticed it but didn't comment. This wasn't the time for words of comfort. Atlas growled low, a sound so deep it barely vibrated through the air, but enough to let Eli know that the soldiers were closer than they thought. They continued down the hallway, moving swiftly but cautiously. Every shadow seemed to pulse with hidden threats, every step a gamble with their lives. The walls of the once grand palace loomed around them, cracked and broken, a reflection of the shattered kingdom that had once called this place home. As they approached the hangar bay, the tension in the air grew unbearable. The distant voices of the soldiers had disappeared, but that silence only added to the weight of impending danger. Eli kept his hand on his blaster, his instincts screaming that they weren't alone. A loud clang echoed through the corridor, and suddenly the door to the hangar was thrown open. A squad of enemy soldiers stormed inside, their weapons drawn, faces hidden beneath the impassive sheen of their helmets. "Run!" Eli hissed, shoving Arla forward. They sprinted toward the hangar's exit, Atlas bolting ahead of them. The soldiers reacted instantly, shouting commands as they raised their rifles. The first shot rang out, striking the wall inches from Eli's head. He returned fire without thinking, his blaster scorching the air with precision shots. One soldier dropped, then another, but more poured in from the side entrances, cutting off their escape route. "Go!" Eli shouted again, pushing Arla toward a nearby stack of crates. She dove behind them just as a volley of blaster fire lit up the air around them, sending sparks and debris flying. Eli ducked, rolling behind a pillar for cover. He fired off a few more rounds, forcing the soldiers to take cover. But there were too many of them, and they were closing in fast. Arla's voice trembled as she spoke from behind the crates. "We're trapped! What do we do?" Eli cursed under his breath. He needed to think fast. They couldn't hold this position much longer. He glanced at Atlas, who was crouched beside him, growling low in his throat. "We fight our way out," Eli said grimly. He didn't like the odds, but there was no other choice. The hangar bay doors were their only escape route, and the enemy was blocking the way. He tapped into his communicator, calling up the Valkyrie's autopilot system. "Valkyrie, initiate remote takeoff protocol, hangar bay 12. He ordered. The ship's engines roared to life in the distance. The sound sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through Eli's veins. He could hear the familiar hum of the Valkyrie's thrusters growing louder as the ship powered up, ready to take off at a moment's notice. "They're going to push us into a corner," Eli said, reloading his blaster. "When I give the signal, we make a break for it. Stay behind me, and don't stop." Arla nodded, her face pale but resolute. Atlas crouched low, ready to spring into action. Eli waited, his heart pounding in his chest, timing it perfectly. The soldiers advanced cautiously, thinking they had their targets cornered. That was their mistake. Now! Eli barked. He burst from cover, firing a rapid volley of shots as he charged forward. Atlas lunged beside him, a blur of muscle and fur, attacking the nearest soldier with lightning speed. The soldiers staggered back, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Arla sprinted after them, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts as she followed Eli through the chaos. The hangar doors loomed ahead, just within reach. But the soldiers weren't done yet. They regrouped quickly, closing in from both sides. Eli could feel the weight of the odds pressing down on him, but he kept moving, kept fighting. They were almost there. Almost free. And then, just as they reached the hangar doors, something unexpected happened. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, a deep rumble reverberating through the palace. Eli's eyes widened as he realized what it was, an explosion, far too close for comfort. The explosion rippled through the air, sending chunks of debris and metal flying. Eli instinctively shielded Arla with his body as the blast knocked them to the ground. His ears rang, the world momentarily consumed by a deafening roar. Atlas yelped, scrambling to his feet amidst the chaos, his dark fur singed by the heat. For a split second, Eli thought this might be it. But years of battlefield instincts took over, and he pushed himself up, hauling Arla with him. "Move!" he yelled, though his voice felt distant in his own ears. The palace walls groaned, stone and metal collapsing in a chain reaction as the explosion reverberated through the structure. Eli could feel the tremors under his feet, the ground shaking like a beast waking from its slumber. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning the world into a clouded nightmare. But the Valkyrie was waiting. She hovered above the hangar, the ramp down and engines roaring as if impatient for their escape. Arla, dazed but conscious, staggered forward, her breath labored. "I can't," she started, but Eli cut her off, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the ship. "You can and you will," he barked, more forceful than he'd intended. "We don't have time." Atlas led the charge, bolting up the ramp as Eli and Arla followed close behind. Just as they reached the top, a barrage of blaster fire erupted from behind, the remaining enemy soldiers not about to let their prize slip away. Eli turned, firing back with precision, taking down 2 soldiers before pulling the hatch lever. The ramp sealed with a satisfying hiss. Inside, the Valkyrie's cockpit was a sanctuary of flashing lights and familiar sounds. Eli moved quickly, strapping Arla into a seat and securing himself at the controls. His fingers danced over the dashboard, and the engines roared to full power. "Atlas, co-pilot position," Eli ordered, not even looking at his companion as he flicked switches to stabilize the ship. The dog trotted to his spot, ears alert, as if fully understanding the gravity of the situation. Outside, the palace was collapsing in on itself, the structure buckling under the strain of the explosion. "Brace yourself," Eli said over his shoulder to Arla, her pale face reflecting the violent tremors beneath them. "We're getting out of here." The Valkyrie shot forward, her thrusters blazing as she broke through the crumbling hangar doors and into the open sky. Behind them, the palace imploded, sending up a cloud of smoke and dust that blotted out the horizon. The planet's surface, once a grand kingdom, was now a wasteland of broken structures and burning debris. For a moment, silence returned to the cockpit, broken only by the steady hum of the Valkyrie's engines. Eli exhaled a long breath, his knuckles white from gripping the controls too tightly. They had made it out, barely. Arla slumped back in her seat, her chest heaving. I can't believe we escaped." Her voice was shaky, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Eli didn't respond immediately. His focus was on the sky ahead, making sure they weren't being pursued. The enemy was relentless. They wouldn't let the last princess of Vorotai slip away so easily. Not without a fight. "Why are you helping me?" Arla asked, her voice quiet now, almost vulnerable. Eli spared her a glance, his expression unreadable. "I've been asking myself the same question." He turned back to the controls, adjusting their course. The atmosphere thinned as they broke through into the cold expanse of space. Stars blinked into view, a sharp contrast to the destruction they had just fled. But even as they left the dying planet behind, the weight of the conflict followed them. "You should have left me," Arla said after a long pause, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Everyone else did." Eli let the silence hang for a moment. "I don't leave people behind," he said finally, his voice gruff. "Not anymore." Arla looked at him then, something shifting in her expression. "You're different from the others," she said softly. "The mercenaries, the bounty hunters, they only care about credits." Eli's jaw clenched, his past flaring up like a wound that hadn't healed. "Maybe I used to be one of them." Atlas let out a low whine, sensing the tension in the room. Eli scratched behind his ears, more to calm himself than the dog. "Look," he said, his voice steadying. "Right now, we've got bigger problems. Whoever's after you won't stop just because we're off planet. They'll come with everything they've got." Arla sat up straighter, her fear replaced by a spark of determination. "Then we'll fight." Eli raised an eyebrow. "You? Fight?" She met his gaze, her silver eyes burning with newfound resolve. "I'm the last of my people. If I don't fight, who will?" Eli leaned back in his seat, studying her. She wasn't the same scared girl he had found in the ruins. There was strength in her now, something raw and untested but undeniably there. He could see it. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. "All right, Princess," Eli said, the hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "But first things first, we need to figure out who's coming for you, and why." As if on cue, the ship's proximity alarm blared, the sound sharp and urgent. Eli's eyes flicked to the radar. Several blips appeared on the screen, fast and closing in on their position. "Looks like we don't have long to figure that out," he muttered. Arla tensed, gripping the armrests of her seat. "Who is it?" Eli's eyes narrowed as he scanned the incoming ships. His fingers moved rapidly over the controls, preparing the Valkyrie for combat. "Whoever they are," Eli said, his voice hardening, "they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." With that, the Valkyrie surged forward into the vastness of space, the enemy hot on their tail. The chase had begun. The Valkyrie sliced through the void of space like a sleek predator, its thrusters humming with restrained power. Eli's hands moved swiftly over the controls, his eyes locked on the radar screen. The blips were closing in fast, faster than they should be. He cursed under his breath. Whoever was chasing them had some serious tech. Arla sat rigid in her seat, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. Atlas, ever watchful, stayed by Eli's side, his dark eyes flicking between his human and the incoming threat as if ready to launch into action. 3 ships? Eli muttered, his brow furrowed. 2 fighters and something bigger. A corvette class, maybe? Arla leaned forward, her fear momentarily masked by curiosity. "Can we outrun them?" Eli shot her a quick glance. "Not if they've got a corvette on their side. They'll close the distance in minutes." "Then what do we do?" "Simple," Eli said, flipping a switch that sent the ship's shields humming to life. "We fight." Arla's eyes widened. "Fight? Against that?" She gestured to the radar where the blips were multiplying as the enemy ships spread out to encircle them. Eli's lips twitched into a grin, one that spoke more of defiance than confidence. "You've never seen the Valkyrie in action." The proximity alarms screamed louder, and Eli felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. The cockpit's lights dimmed slightly as the power diverted to weapons systems. His fingers hovered over the throttle. "Atlas, ready for evasive maneuvers?" Eli asked without turning. The dog barked once, sharp and focused. Even with the tension mounting, Eli found comfort in his loyal companion's unflinching readiness. Arla swallowed hard, trying to control her racing heart. "What do you need me to do?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "Ever fired ship weapons before?" "No, but I can learn." He hesitated for a moment, assessing her resolve. She was scared, yes, but there was steel in her now, that same determination from before. He nodded toward the co-pilot's seat. All right, take that station. I'll guide you through it. Arla scrambled into the co-pilot's seat, her hands hovering nervously over the unfamiliar controls. Just focus, Eli said, his voice calm despite the danger. I'll handle the ship. You keep an eye on the targeting systems. When I give the signal, you press that button, no hesitation. Arla nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. Got it. The enemy ships came into view, sleek black shapes against the endless expanse of stars. Their formation was tight, disciplined, professional mercs, no doubt. Whoever was hunting them wasn't pulling any punches. A voice crackled over the comms, cold and unyielding. Valkyrie, surrender the princess, and we'll let you live. Resist, and we'll tear you apart. Eli snorted, leaning back in his seat. They always say that, don't they? Arla glanced at him, her heart still hammering. We're not surrendering, are we? Not a chance, Eli said, his tone hardened by years of combat. He flicked off the comms, silencing any further negotiations. He didn't have time for talk. The first fighter opened fire, its laser cannons lighting up the space between them in rapid bursts of energy. Eli rolled the Valkyrie hard to the right, the shots barely missing as they tore through the space where the ship had been moments before. Hold on! Eli called out as the ship jerked violently, dodging another barrage of enemy fire. His hands moved with practiced precision, keeping the ship dancing between streams of deadly plasma. Targeting systems online, Arla said, her voice tight with concentration. I have them in sight. Wait for it. Eli's eyes were locked onto the lead fighter, waiting for the perfect moment. Now! Arla slammed her hand down on the button. The Valkyrie's forward cannons roared to life, sending a volley of plasma bolts toward the enemy ship. The lead fighter exploded in a brilliant flash of light, debris scattering through space. Yes! Arla gasped, a mix of relief and exhilaration flooding her. But the moment was short-lived as the corvette loomed closer, its heavy cannons swiveling toward them. Eli's face darkened. The corvette was a fortress compared to the fighters. Its shields would hold against anything the Valkyrie could throw at it in a direct confrontation. And worse, it was closing in fast enough that outrunning it was now impossible. They're trying to push us into a corner, Eli muttered. His mind raced, considering their dwindling options. What now? Arla asked, sensing the shift in his tone. Eli's eyes flicked to the asteroid field up ahead, a scattered expanse of jagged rocks and debris. We go where they can't follow, he said, adjusting their course toward the field. Arla's stomach dropped as she saw the chaotic expanse of floating rocks. Through there? Isn't that suicide? Not if you know what you're doing, Eli said, pushing the throttle to its maximum. The Valkyrie surged forward, diving headfirst into the asteroid field with reckless speed. Behind them, the corvette and the remaining fighter hesitated at the edge of the field. It was too risky for a ship that size to navigate without getting torn apart by the asteroids. But the fighter wasn't giving up so easily. It darted after them, weaving through the floating rocks in hot pursuit. Keep those targeting systems ready, Eli said, his eyes darting between the radar and the maze of asteroids ahead. The fighter closed the distance, firing wildly as it followed them deeper into the field. The Valkyrie twisted and turned, narrowly dodging massive rocks that tumbled through space. Each maneuver felt like threading a needle. Lock onto that fighter! Eli called out, his voice strained as he dodged another massive boulder. I've got it! Arla shouted, locking the crosshairs onto the enemy's ship. Fire! Arla slammed the button again. The Valkyrie's rear cannons unleashed a burst of plasma, catching the fighter mid-turn. It exploded into a fireball, the wreckage spinning off into the abyss of the asteroid field. Arla let out a shaky breath. That was close. We're not out yet, Eli said, his jaw clenched. The corvette was still out there, waiting. But for now, they had a brief moment of respite, hidden among the rocks. As the Valkyrie slowed to a more cautious pace, weaving through the asteroids, Eli glanced at Arla. She was shaken but alive, and stronger than he had expected. You did good back there, he said, surprising even himself with the compliment. Arla nodded, her expression still serious. What's next? Eli's gaze turned back to the void beyond the asteroids. The enemy wouldn't stop. They'd regroup, come after them with more firepower, more ships. This was just the beginning. No, Eli said quietly. We figure out who sent them,